going to be simplifying algebraic expressions. And to simplify algebraic expressions, it's important to understand what words mean. And when we talk about the word terms, terms in an expression are separated by a plus or minus sign. So in this case, this example here, I have 4 separate terms. I have the 7x, I have the plus 5, I have the minus 3y, and I have the 2x. So these are all terms. They are separated by a plus or minus. Like terms have the same variable, the same letter, raised to the same power. So in this example, we see like terms here are the 7x and the plus 2x. They're like because they have the same variable or letter. Constants are just a number. So in this example here, my constant is that plus 5 or positive 5. When we talk about the word coefficient, a coefficient is the number that is being multiplied by the variable. So in an algebraic expression, the coefficient will be a number that is attached to the variable. So in this example here, my coefficient is 7 because it's attached to the variable x. So the coefficient is the number attached to the variable. So when we want to combine like terms, we're going to combine the like terms by adding or subtracting the coefficients. And remember, the coefficients are the numbers in front of the variable. So I'm going to start off with a simple example of like terms. And again, like terms have the same variable raised to the same power. And when you have like terms, you can combine them by adding or subtracting the coefficients. So here we have a 14a minus 5a. Because they both have the same variable, we can combine the 14 minus 5 and then attach the a to it. So we do the arithmetic here. 14 minus 5 is 9, and you attach the like variable. Now this is a multiple term example where we're going to simplify by adding or subtracting like terms. So in this case, I see I have 7y, a minus 3y, and a plus y. Now with that plus y, we don't necessarily see it, but there really is a coefficient of 1 in front of that y. So it's very important to understand that if there is a variable, there is a coefficient of 1 if no coefficient is shown. So now we want to combine like terms. We're going to take the coefficients, the 7, the minus 3, and the plus 1, and we're going to do the arithmetic. So I end up with 7 minus 3 is 4, plus 1 will give us 5, and I attach the variable to it. So I combined those 3 terms into 1 because they were like terms. I can also combine the constants because constants are like terms. So in this case, I have a plus 8 minus 1, and plus 8 minus 1 will give us a plus 7. So I have to make sure that I separate the terms with the appropriate sign. So when I simplify this expression, I end up with 5y plus 7. One more example here where I have multiple variables and I have constants. So again, to combine like terms, they have to have the same variable attached. So I look for the like terms by 3a and the plus 2a, and I do the arithmetic, 3 plus 2, and I attach the a to it. So I have 5a. Now I'm going to work with the b's. I have a plus 5b and a minus 4b. So I do the arithmetic, it's 5 minus 4. Now when you do this 5 minus 4, you end up with a 1, but you never see a coefficient of 1, so when you write that piece of the expression, you just want to write the plus b because it was a positive 1. And now we're going to combine the positive 11 minus 6, and we get plus 5. So we simplified the expression. Pause and try. So again, you see here we have a coefficient of 1 in front of that x. So you have 1 minus 4 will be a negative 3, plus 2 would give you a negative 1. You won't see a coefficient of a negative 1, you'll just see the negative sign for x, and there's nothing to combine with the negative 6, so you just bring it down in the expression. Pause and try. So in this case, you see we have 7y minus 2y. The 7y minus 2y, you have negative 7 minus 2, same sign, add and keep the sign, so you end up with a negative 9y. And again, it doesn't matter what order you go in. I like to just go in the order of what I see first. So I see I have a positive 2. I'm looking for any other constants, and I see I have a plus 12. So I add the 2 and the 12 together, and I get plus 14. And then lastly, I have a negative 9x minus x, and remember there's a coefficient of 1, so we have a negative 9 minus 1, same sign, add and keep the sign, and you end up with a negative 10x. So be really careful when you're doing the combined like terms and knowing the rules for adding and subtracting integers. Now, when you write your answer, it doesn't matter if you did the negative 10x first, and then the minus 9y, and then the plus 14 on the end. The order doesn't matter, but the signs of the coefficients do. Now we're going to work with the distributive property, and how the distributive property works is you have parentheses, and inside the parentheses you have an algebraic expression. So they're not just simple numbers, you have variables and numbers inside. And when there's a number on the outside, you need to clear the parentheses by taking that and distributing it or multiplying it to everything inside the parentheses. So when I do this, I do a times that b, and then I do a times the c, but I have to separate the two by the appropriate sign in between. And because it's plus there, I end up having plus ac. So be careful, because when you're distributing a negative, that negative is going to change the sign. So again, I distribute that negative a. I get a negative times a positive is going to make that a negative ab. And then a negative times a plus or a positive will give me a minus ac. So this is the rule. Let's see what it's going to look like as an algebraic expression. So this is an algebraic expression where I have an expression inside with a number on the outside of parentheses. So this is what our distributive property will look like. I have to take that number and multiply it to everything inside. So I have 4 times y, so I'm going to simply have 4y. And then I do the multiplication to the end part, and I get 4 times 2, which will give me plus 8. So we're going to do an example here when I have a negative sign on the outside of the parentheses. Now remember, if you have a negative sign on the outside of parentheses, it really means you have a negative 1 that you're distributing. So I have a negative times a positive, which is going to make that y a negative y. And then I have a negative times a positive 2, so it's going to make it a minus 2. So be careful when you see a negative sign on the outside of parentheses. It's going to change the signs of everything inside the parentheses. And one more example here, we have a negative 5 that we're distributing, and I'm going to distribute it to that x. I end up with a negative 5x. And then when I distribute this negative 5 to this minus 3, it's really a negative times a negative, so that's going to change it to a positive or plus 15. So the rules apply for the integers or multiplication of sign numbers when you do the distributive property. Pause and try. So you see here, I multiply, I get 30 minus 6y. Now you're going to see a combination of distributive property and combined like terms. So whenever you have the distributive property, that has to go first. So you're going to have to do the distributive property before you can combine like terms. And if there's a minus sign on the outside of the parentheses, that really means I'm distributing a -1. So you have to make sure you distribute first. So the 3x is just going to come down, and then I'm going to distribute that -1 to everything in the parentheses. So a -1 times a +4 is going to be a -4x. A -1 times a +2 is going to make that -2. Now that the distributive property is done, I can combine like terms. And the like terms here is that 3x minus 4x. 3x minus 4x, it's 3 minus 4. I'm going to subtract and keep the sign of the higher number, so I end up with a -1. And remember, you don't write the -1 coefficient, you just write it with a negative sign. And then you just bring down the -2. Pause and try. So again, you have to do the distributive property first. So you have a -2 times a +8 is going to make that a -8y. A -2 times a -5 is going to make that a +10. And now you can combine the 3 minus 8. 3 minus 8 is a -5, and then you get the +10 as your expression. So now this one has double distributive property involved and combined like terms. So you want to make sure you do the distributive property first before you combine like terms. So when you do the distributive property, make sure you take the number on the outside of the parentheses and multiply it to everything inside. So 4 times y is going to give you 4y. 4 times a +3 is going to be +12. And then I'm taking that -5. Pause and try. So the first thing you're going to do is the distributive property. I distribute the 7. I end up getting 7x minus 7. And I'm going to distribute that -5. I'm going to get a -10 minus 15. Be really careful with your signs. I combine like terms here. 7 minus 10 is a -3, and -7 minus 15 will be a -22.